Let's enjoy this cover. I think I spent too much time already building this work of art. I'm using some CSS animations there. I mean, if you want to check it out, I will share the slides with you. I'm going to talk about GraphQL today. Who is familiar with GraphQL? Who's using GraphQL? Okay, so just few people and some shy people as well. Just make me a signal without letting you know that they know something about it. This is going to be hard. This is going to be hard. Well, I'm happy to be in San Francisco where all the hipsters and cool people is. I'm coming from London, and I'll start with the most important slide, which is my name. I'm Gerard Sanz. I'm a Google developer expert, and I went full-time 3 years ago. So actually, I don't have a job. I just go to conference and give trainings, talks, and I have done few of them. I'm based in the UK, so I basically do talks in Europe. But because I've spent the last 3 years just doing that, I expanded I'm going to get everywhere. That's my plan. But you can see here, I'm pretty much everywhere in the US. I tried some exotic locations that you can see here, Japan, Brazil, Argentina. I mean, who's counting? I mean, I did 114 talks. Canary Islands as well. I did a training there. Really cool. Oh, that's my blogging. So as a Google developer expert, I blog in this publication in Medium. I started doing Angular, but I also cover React and Vue. And you can find some of my blog posts in there. I also run a couple of communities. So one of them is Angular Zone, the other one is GraphQL London. And you can follow our meetups. There's videos online, and these are interesting technologies. How many of you are actually Angular developers or using Angular? Okay, not that popular. What about React? Okay, that's a big React audience. What about Vue? Okay, cool. I'm going to show some code using Vue, but actually GraphQL is mainly used in React. It's very popular in the React community, so it's very much a good fit for you. And most of the code and APIs are shared between any of the frameworks. So actually, if you learn how to use GraphQL with Vue, you can then use it easily with React or Angular. I actually do it myself, so I can tell you that it's an easy experience. I'm also a trainer. Actually, I'm here in San Francisco because I'm traveling to GSConf Hawaii. Any of you are going there? Okay, Sean. Yeah, we are going to meet there. I'm very excited about it. And I'm just on the way to Hawaii, so I asked the organizers, and they invite me here. Because of my full-time commitment, I also do Master of Ceremonies, so you can see me here at some conferences. This is Vue.js Amsterdam, and you can see me with Evan Yu, nice guy from the Vue core team. And here, this is a nice event that I organized a year ago. And maybe you haven't heard about it because you were spending time learning React. But this is the first Angular conference that was in a cruise. I mean, how cool is that? I mean, React people, you are sleeping. You're sleeping. This is what we do in Angular. And it's not, I mean, I could just, Photoshop that, but this actually happened. Sorry to show you these slides like this in your face. Yeah. Yeah, nice. This is actually a Royal Caribbean cruise with all the perks. And look at this venue. I mean, I don't want to tell anything bad about this venue that we are in, but look at that. Yeah, that's some level. So next week, I'm gonna be doing this training, 3 days Vue, advanced Vue training. And I'm going to do it with Chris Sevilleja from Scotch.io, the tutorial website. And maybe this is a good time to tell you that it doesn't matter really what framework you use. I mean, I use Angular, I use React, I use Vue. Sometimes I will just be getting crazy when I have to port a solution from React to Vue and not find the components that I want to use. Maybe you are in this situation. And yeah, I mean, if you want to take a look at Vue, you will see that the code is really easy. I mean, coming from React or Angular, it's just very easy to follow. Okay, so that was a small intro. Let's get started with GraphQL. So I think that one way to introduce GraphQL is with a timeline, so you can get a feeling of what has happened in the GraphQL scene. And it all started in 2012, and this is when Facebook migrated from HTML5 to native apps. And maybe you remember that time. I mean, I don't know how young you are, but this is a few years ago. And you can see the application. So this is how Facebook native app looked at the time. And this was already using GraphQL. So if you were using that Facebook client, you were already using this technology. So GraphQL is created at this time. And basically it's created because there's a lot of challenges. They were migrating from HTML to a native app, and they were trying to build a massive solution. And they had big teams, large teams working together. And basically they found that REST APIs were really difficult to work with. There were a few issues. One of the issues was the information that was being transferred. They couldn't tailor the bandwidth for all these calls. Another problem they had between the teams was working using the same data for different entities, for different data models. And communicating that information was a big mess. I mean, I don't know if you have been working with large solutions using REST APIs, but it can get messy. Sometimes you need to ask for the backend team to build some API just to realize that another team just built the same with small changes on them. So that's going to take a lot of time. So they built GraphQL to solve most of these problems automatically. It's in 2014, so that was working on all the clients of Facebook, native clients from 2012. And in 2014, we got a Vue release. So this is just to give you some context. These are all pretty new technologies. It won't be until 2015 that GraphQL is open source. So Facebook, it's confident that this technology is valuable for the community, and they will create what is called the JavaScript specification. From that specification and the implementation for JavaScript, they open to anyone to implement the GraphQL stack. So actually today, we have many stacks using anything from PHP, Java, .NET, Elixir, I don't know, what is this? What are you guys using? Kotlin? You are not backend developers, of course. Okay. At that time, they also implement the first client. This is a Facebook client. Maybe you haven't heard about it. It's not so popular, but it's a Relay Classic. So it's very much Facebook infrastructure. So the same happens with Google. They build some in-house tool, and then when they feel that it's mature enough, then they open source it. This is the same for GraphQL and Relay. A year passed, and in 2016, there's the big announcement. GitHub is going to publish a REST API, but also a GraphQL API. And this is a big announcement that everybody follows in the community, in the GraphQL community. So this is a big moment for the GraphQL technology. Then we also get the first website. So this is still pretty recent. If we think about it, this is just 2 years ago. There's also the first conference. This is happening here in San Francisco. It's the first GraphQL Summit. So you basically you are hosting the most important conference about GraphQL. So you should be able to catch up with anything that is happening. So it's really exciting because everybody else have to come here actually to get on top of things. In 2017, we got a new version. So before it was not still a version 1, so we got some stable Relay Modern client. There's also a new player that year is Apollo. And Apollo, it's implementing some nice features. With Apollo Client 2, they go ahead of Relay. They implement some really nice APIs. Basically, they make the client really easy to use. And until today, it's become kind of the standard for GraphQL as a client. We got also some new players. So this is Amazon. Amazon actually takes Apollo client and builds a wrapper on top of it, including some nice features like offline support and some niceties. Of course, the main value that they add is that they also offer a backend solution where you have a dashboard and you can create all of the GraphQL information, related information, and then you can link that with the same client without you having to do the plumbing. So that's 2017. Just last year, we got some nice additions. So there's also the people from GraphQL. I don't know if you heard of them. They changed their name to Prisma, and they started offering some GraphQL as a service. So this would be the hosting for a GraphQL server that you can use for free, or depending on a subscription, you can then grow as your usage increases. We also get the same strategy from the Apollo team. And just recently, in the last GraphQL Summit, they announced what is called now the Apollo platform. And it's a set of all the tooling and all the infrastructure to build enterprise-ready GraphQL solutions. We also got some changes within Amazon. They also create what is the AWS Amplify. And that's going to be a CLI and also the tooling to help you out building these enterprise solutions. So there has been a lot of things going on. There's also a new implementation that it's linked to Postgres. And this is Hasura. And you can see there's probably more players coming. I mean, GraphQL is now really stable, and there's New York Times using it. There's big companies like GitHub migrating all of the APIs to GraphQL. So this is a really nice time to join. Some nice resources. So this is probably the most important resource, is how to learn to implement this with different platforms. So you will find code for Angular, React, Vue, etc. And these are really nice resources to learn about this. Of course, you also need some tooling, and this is also really kind of mandatory to use. It will give you some insights of what's going on the cache, what's going on the client, what queries are being run. You also can run your own queries. I mean, this is mandatory for GraphQL developers. So this is just kind of the intro that I wanted to give you. And in order to make this, keynote, I wanted to do something out of the ordinary. And this is a small application that I built. It's called Hands Up. And the idea about this application is that it can be used during conferences or events, and is in order to get engagement from the audience. So if you want to use it, I mean, don't do this at home. Share, some proof of concept with an audience. But you can use this with your laptop or your mobile phone, and you will be looking at the list of all of the talks. And I'm going to ask you to rate the talks that you like. Of course, this is something that you can use right now, or you can use throughout the day. Last time that I tried something like this, it didn't survive the talk, because there's always some hackers in the room that try to blow it up. If you can constrain yourself, just for today, just don't create a robot or something just to crash it, and just enjoy it for a bit, and then let it without trouble. And okay, let me just now show you what it does very quickly. So this is the UI, and as I was explaining, it has all of the talks for today, and this is just kind of the volume, and as you start voting, it will show you the votes, and it looks something like this. When you vote, there's some little animation there, and it will just increase the volume, and then it will just order so we can know what talks are more popular. I mean, it's just a small tool. That's pretty much it. I will be adding some other features. I'm gonna add authorization. I'm gonna use auth0, and I'm going to add real time and some other cool things. But just as a demo, that will be it. Okay. Let's see what's next. So what's the architecture? The architecture that we are going to be building is something like this. So on the client, we have a Vue client. I'm going to hook up this auth0. I'm using Gmail, so you can use any Gmail accounts. It should be, it wouldn't be that complex to add Twitter or some other providers, but I only have a Gmail for this demo. And then I'm going to use AWSAppSync. That's going to be both on the client and on the server. And that basically means that I don't need to go to the hurdle of building my own GraphQL server. I mean, I know that every one of you is dying to do that. Go into Node, into your Node environment and just build a GraphQL server. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's a lot of work. By using Amazon infrastructure is just much easier. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use AppSync for that. So the first thing when we are building a GraphQL solution is starting with the schema. And the schema will be our data model. In this case, it's a pretty simple data model, so it should be fine to follow. The main idea of this app is to extend it so people can add new entries. In the demo that I've shared with you, the entries are pre-filled, but this is something that it could be added later. So users could log in and then create their own questions for a panel or a speaker. And here you can see how that schema looks like. So we have what is called a type. So this question will be a type, and the types are related. So we have question, user, and both types, and these have some relations. On the types, we have fields, and some of the fields have data type, so we can see body is using a string data type, and we also can see like some symbols. What do you think that exclamation point means? Okay? Factorial. Well, that's a possible meaning, but it's not. You want to factor the body string? No, it's a mandatory field. So it's just an easy syntax to say this field is going to be mandatory. Some people would use like an asterisk. I mean, this is just one syntax. Some of these data types are system. So some of those are already created, available to you. Some of them are created, for example, from the supplier. So Amazon has also created like some helpers, some data types that are useful for your solution, so you can use those. Regarding the ID, this is a generic ID, and you can implement any kind of ID. So it's just kind of a placeholder that you can extend later on to your needs. So this is how it looks. You can also see that the relations can also point to lists, and this is the case for both. I mean, some of the types are self-explanatory, and also the fields. So for example, we have votes. So every time that you vote on one of the entries, it will just add one instance for the type vote. And then we also have the same relationship back. So if we look into the votes, I can find out what question was originating that vote. And this is why we call GraphQL. So these types are nodes, and this will be kind of a graph representation. If we go to the user, this is when AW0 comes into play. So we will show this a little bit later, but this will hold the information from the authorization token that I receive from AW0. And then I will link that token into a user in my system. And that will be linking both. So once I have a Gmail account that is trying to log into this application, I will create an entry on the users, and I will add the token so all of the calls are secured or authorized. And then I also added the type for the bots, so that will go into this type, and the fields are just using the same syntax that I was explaining. So I think that covers pretty much all. I mean, the syntax for the list, they use like the array, like the square brackets. So it's just very easy to share. So this is one of the first advantages that we have over REST. When we define the GraphQL schema, that means that all the team, it doesn't matter how big the team, how large the team is, you can share the schema with all the teams. Imagine you have like 40 teams. It's a massive infrastructure like in Facebook. Because everybody has the schema, you don't have to communicate anything. Everybody can just go into the schema, and you already know the fields and what information is available for every single type and relation. So what we will do when we build our queries in GraphQL is just go through that schema. We will be exploring the schema and grabbing information from it. So this gives us a lot of nice features. Another thing that it can be done by having a schema is that you can document it. So you can easily auto-generate what is called introspection. You can go through your schema and automate the process of documenting that schema, and then create, for example, the accompanying documentation for your application. So some nice features. I mean, I'm kind of an evangelizer of GraphQL. I hope that somebody gets excited enough to try it. And this is how it looks for AppSync. So AppSync will give you, on the server side, will give you a dashboard. And it works in this way. It allows us to go into a small editor. We can take that schema that I was showing you, write it in the syntax using types and the different entry points, and then it will generate the code for you. So actually, that's going to get a lot of the job done. And that also will link it with a database, et cetera, et cetera. So that's going to speed up. Probably if you are building a proof of concept, that's the way to go. Of course, this is not the only solution. I was talking about Prisma, Apollo. In Apollo is Apollo Engine. There's also Hasura. So you have few options there to choose. And they will all give you this kind of setup. It's going to give you a hosting that you can go there, create your schema, and get everything set up pretty quickly. So for the case of AppSync, it works like this. So we will start creating a schema that will be uploaded into the infrastructure. That will create the data source. That will be automatically done. In the case of AppSync, it creates a DynamoDB database. And then it just makes all of the plumbing for you. So it just set up real time. It just set up the subscriptions. It just does everything. Of course, it's extendable, so you can go anywhere. There's some hooks that you can go and extend the schema that is created automatically by these tools. So it's quite powerful. Of course, if you are familiar on this side of the backend, there's also Lambda. There's also integrations with other databases like legacy systems. I mean, there's a whole wall that you have access to. Let's go and quickly show, let's see, because I don't have that much time, but I wanted to show you like live. So this is the schema And I created the schema just following. So this is the translation from that diagram into a DSL. So this is an input that's going to be part of a query or a mutation. And all of these were created for me. So this is a really interesting thing. We will just create the type, add the type into this console, and it will create for me the create, update, and delete. So actually, this is going to save you a lot of time. What else we can do? We can also run Lambda functions. We can also run queries. This is how it looks. And probably the next thing that I want to show you is the database. So once I generate the schema, it will create the database and all the data tables that will map with those types that I was showing you. And this is done for me. But I can explore those, and you will see that that schema that I showed you created these three tables: the bot table, the user table, and the questions table. And this is exactly the information that we saw on the UI. And then if I go to the bots, let's see if you are using it. So there's 100 items, yeah, 200, oh my God, 300, 306 bots already. So thanks a lot. I hope it's not only one person doing that. So this is more or less what you get. You get the dashboard, you get some tools, and you get some assistance to create, the schema. Once you familiarize, you can create, more complex schemas. I mean, this is just a small demo. Okay, let's see how we go and create the client. So we have the schema. We created all of the backend, and actually the result of that is an endpoint. Let me show you the endpoint. So the endpoint is just looking like this, APIs. Where is it? Yeah. So here I get the URL that will give me access to the GraphQL server. And just using that, I can then share it with anyone, and they can use tools to run queries, mutations, and also real-time subscriptions. Maybe I can show you right now how that looks. So just by copying this URL, I can go into a tool that it's called GraphQL Playground, and it will give me this environment, which is, if you compare this with how you build within REST, this is a really nice tool. So I'm going to show you how that works. One thing that I can do by using the schema is that feature that I was telling you, the introspection. So I get this nice self-documented schema, and then I can see all of the different options. So let's see. I want to get the list of the questions on the system. So if I look here, I can find these list questions. And it's going to return what is a type called question connection. Then I can navigate, and I can see that I can filter it, I can limit the number of results, and I can also see what is in there. So this is coming back with these items, is a list of the questions, and this is for pagination. Let's navigate to the items. And we finally get into the type, which is the question. So you can see that you can navigate this. This is auto-generated, so you only need the URL. Any GraphQL server is just the endpoint. So from the endpoint, you put it on a tool, which is, in this case, GraphQL Playground, and then you can just do everything that you need. So this is basically what helped Facebook to do the migration in a really fast pace. So you can imagine you are a developer of this GraphQL solution. You get into your tooling, and then you can start exploring and catching data from it. And this works with this syntax. So this is GraphQL syntax. And we start with an entry point. And we have 3 entry points in GraphQL. The first one is query. And then this is a description of what's in there. So I'm going to just remove this. And you will see that there's some nice features already. So I'm going to get this list of options. And as I build my query, it just shows me the different information. So I can go to the documentation, but the tooling is also showing me. Right now, we have also this in the IDEs. So if you are using Visual Code, you get this in your IDE as well. So imagine this compared to the REST, building REST APIs. It's type safe, et cetera, et cetera. And as you can imagine, we are just using the information from the schema, but it's on the IDE. So it's similar to the experience that TypeScript gives you. Although TypeScript is not so popular in React, I guess that more people will start using these features. So then from here I can see, okay, so now I'm on the question, so I can pick the fields, so I want the ID, what else? And I'll get also the body, which is the text. We can run it, and we get the results. So this is GraphQL. As you can see, it's a modern tool set. It's just based around the schema and just give me a lot of nice features. So that's just a small demo. Let's continue with the slides. Okay. So for the client, this will be a diagram showing you the main operations that we can run. We have two APIs that we are going to use. One is the query API, and this is to fetch information. The other one is the mutation API. So these are two entry points for our GraphQL schema. And this is showing a very common example, which is linked to a database. But actually, the database is not mandatory. You could abstract this layer. I mean, actually, GraphQL is a connector, so you can implement any logic. It's not required that you have to go to a data table as the last step. You could go to the file system. You could go to another third-party system. It's really flexible, but just as a small diagram. So we have few dependencies, and these are all the dependencies that I've used. So we have this AWSAppSync, we have the Vue Apollo. All of these have the same implementations for any platform that you want to use. And this is how you set up the provider. So this is a Vue code. I'm not going to go into much detail, but this is all of the regular API keys are in this file. So I'm just getting the settings from the dashboard, and you are set. Then the main thing that we are doing here is we are injecting the provider, so every component can have access to it. I mean, you do this in different ways. In React, you would use a high-order component, but this is the same idea. So we are just passing that instance through the component hierarchy. And we are set. What we are doing here is setting up the client, and this is using that config and just setting the default client. You can use different clients, and this is just because the AppSync client from Amazon accepts multiple clients. If you were using Apollo, it will just be one possible client. So this is some of the details of this client configuration. I am setting the authentication type. This is paired with the AWS0 setup. There's also some things that I can access from the default Apollo. Remember that AppSync is built on top of Apollo, so you can still access the instance of Apollo. And it's exactly the same if you have been using it. So let's see some example for the query, just to remember. This is the entry point for a query. And this is how the schema looks. So we look into the diagram. This is the specification for the schema. And this is the notation. So this is the entry point. So we have a schema with two fields. One field is query, the other is mutation. Then from that field, I'm going to navigate to the type. So this works like a type system. So the query entry is of type query. And then if I go to the type definition, I can see the different fields in there. So this is, of course, a hierarchy, and you can go as many levels as you need. And this will build the graph and the relations. So here I have these fields. So I can run this, and this is one of the examples that I was showing you. So I can run this list of questions, and I'm going to get the question connection that we know that it's the items and some other information. And then at the end, I'm going to get the questions details. This is kind of the navigation that I did on the right side. The actual implementation looks like this. What I've done in this solution is I put all of these queries on a file so I can find them. And the only thing that I introduce is this GQL. And the thing is, you don't want to instantiate the objects that are going to be needed to run this query. So this is helper that is going to take this string and is going to create all of the classes, fields, types, and do all that work for you. And it's working using these, how it's called, string templates, functions, I think. And it's just passing this string, and you have a function that you can then implement what you are going to do. So that work is going to be done for you. And in some setups, you can put these queries into separate files, and then you can build those in build time. So you can save some cycles on execution. In this solution, I'm just running these on runtime. So this is how the setup works. When we run this, we will create a component which will hold the list. I mean, this is a common practice. I'm just binding. So this is very common. So I'm binding. I'm using this notation, but I'm just passing a prop. And this will be the question items. What is the list contain? And then, I mean, this is just common code for Vue Apollo. And in Vue, usually everything works using objects, so there are no classes. We just creating an object, so we have an Apollo object, and then we can define this entry, and we can run the query by running this function. So that's for queries. We can then also run the mutations, and mutations work really similar. The only thing that will change is the type. So now we are going to change our GraphQL server. And what we are going to do in this example is create a new question. That's slightly different. We are going to use some arguments. And the way we use the arguments is by using these variables. This is the information that is going to come from the client. So for example, you will have an input. That input will be passed as a variable. And I'm going to, and this is how you pass it as an argument. So let's see that on the tool, and maybe it's a little bit easier. And I'm going to link that, yeah, I'm going to do two things at the same time. I hope it's not so crazy. Okay, somebody yesterday told me that you hate when people use Sanfran, so I'm using Sanfran here. And it's Sanfran Tours, it's just to make it very popular. And I'm going to run this, and I've done the real-time setup. So I created a subscription, and now my clients are listening to changes on the question. So every time I create a question, they will receive a message, and they will be updated. So I have this like silly setup, and this is a Chrome instance and a Firefox instance. I mean, Chrome versus Firefox is, I mean, we always dream about this. And let's see who wins. Let's see if they fail. So I'm going to create a new question and see what happens in these clients. Cross fingers. OK, so what has happened is that I created the question, and then here, so I pass the parameters, the arguments using this syntax. I mean, it's very similar to JavaScript. And here, one thing that is very interesting in GraphQL is I can specify the return. I can specify the workload for the payload for the return values. And this is very interesting because in REST, sometimes we just need to take whatever comes and then use what we need. But GraphQL is much more efficient because you, from the client, you can tell, oh, I just want these 2 fields. Just forget about the rest. I don't want all that information coming through the wire and taking resources from the server and the client. So of course, GraphQL is just a modern implementation of that. But here, I can just decide what information I want. So if it's a very complex type, you can pick maybe just 2 fields. You don't need to pick the whole thing as the application grows and grows. So let's see what happened. OK, it's a failure. They are both dead. None of the applications work out, actually. OK, forget it. Let's just refresh. I mean, now it should, oh, it just failed? Oh, my God. That's unexpected. OK, let me just start again. Oh, no, it's here. OK, it worked. Let's do it again. I have another one. It's not San Fran Tours, but it's Cisco. I think that's also awful. Cisco Tours. OK, let's start with this one. OK, and here, yes, Chrome did the job, and also Firefox. So this is the real time. Any change that happens on the server is notified to the clients, and this just happened transparently. You didn't have to do any interaction. Probably because I didn't refresh. This is using, on the background, is using a WebSocket, so it's probably just disconnected at the time. OK, so we covered the mutation and also the real time. And this is how it looks. So I mean, there's some more work here because I need to pass the actual text from the question. And then the way it works is one the question, the mutation executes because I can decide the fields that are going to come back in the payload. This is the logic that I'm going to run with that information. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from the cache and add this new item that was created. This is the mutation, how it looks. Let's see if we have time to cover AWS. Yeah, let's cover that very quickly. The first thing that I'm going to show is a demonstration that how it looks, because I think it's much easier. So the way it looks is I have this login, and I'm going to just demonstrate, so it's just easier. So when I click on login, I get the AWS pop-up. I'm going to use Google as identity provider, and that's going to give me some options of my different users. I'm going to pick my account in Gmail. So this is more or less the experience you also will have in mobile and desktop. So now I'm logging, I can see my user, and then from that moment, that user is going to go through all of the different interactions with the server. We can see that you are a little bit lazy, and you are just voting the first one. The first talk is not even happened. I mean, didn't happen yet, the talk. So, I mean, whoever is doing this talk, it will be very popular. OK, let's see. I think we are at the end. Let's go through this. I mean, this is a common, if you have been using AWS, this is what it happens. So we are going to first call the AWS, and that's going to connect to the providers. In this case, it's Gmail. That's going to come back with any of these options, an access token, refresh token, or an ID token. And I'm going to use that token in any of the interactions that I do with my GraphQL server. If you remember from the initial slides, I had that schema. On the schema, I had a field for that information. So the next time the user comes back, it will use that token and then kind of authorize any operations that you want to do. This is how the setup works. I mean, this is just some setup work. This is some APIs. These are implemented for you. So this is what AWS gives you out of the box. There's some, I mean, there's some work to do. But yeah, there's few events. So for example, once I get the token, I'm going to change that flag, and then I'm going to change some of the UI to show, the profile picture, things like that. If you have used that, it's not that interesting. But just to show the capabilities of GraphQL. I mean, I've shown you like some crazy things. I've shown you like the easy like CRUD operations, but I also show you like real time. This is open source. I mean, you can go home and implement this in 20 minutes and have a solid real-time application. And if you want to know more, one thing you need to understand is the community is huge. I mean, I've been in the GraphQL community maybe for 3 years, and now it's massive. I mean, now look at this. It's almost like 50,000 people. This is only Meetup, and I think maybe a few months ago it was half of it. I mean, GraphQL is booming. Some nice references. So I would recommend you totally to go to the next Summit GraphQL. I mean, you live here. You just need to maybe walk there. Just go. And also some influencers. So these are some of the people of the different clients and platforms. So just make sure that you follow them if you are interested. Thanks for listening. See you around.